I think personally the inspiration is a desire to want to contribute. I think we, as lawyers who've studied in some of the finest law schools in India and then abroad, I think we realize that we are beneficiaries of a system which doesn't benefit everyone to the same extent. And so there is a desire to use our knowledge and skills for the public good. And I think professionally, the inspiration came from the fact that as lawyers, we found that the level of drafting expertise currently in Indian legislation and regulation is quite poor and much poorer than you'd want legislation and regulation to ideally be. And I think as both as citizens of India with a concern for the public interest, as well as lawyers who have certain skills to remedy these deficiencies, I think we were in a good position to try and make a difference. And I think that's where the inspiration for starting an organization to specifically look at good governance in India through better regulation and legislation came about. I think the key objectives that we want to achieve, the key objective rather that we want to achieve is essentially impact in legislation. And the way we want to achieve impact in legislation is through careful legal and empirical research, both into areas which require new legislation and regulation, as well as through in existing areas where we think reform is necessary. Personally, for me and for the others in the organization who are of similar ilk, legal academics, I think raising funds for this organization has been an incredible challenge. And the second, of course, is also in starting a new organization, it's also important to have similarly minded people as part of the organization, because what we essentially are doing is that it's as they say nowadays, it's in some sense a slightly disruptive innovation, because there is nothing of the sort which exists in India today in terms of being a legal policy think tank to specifically engage with the government to advise in legislation. So you need similarly minded people who are willing to take a risk, who are willing to forego high salaries and come, and in many cases if they are abroad, come back to India and contribute. Last 5 years, broadly speaking, with the exception of the last 6 or 7 months, have been a wasted opportunity in terms of pushing progressive legislation and regulation through. So, irrespective of which government comes into power, what we'd like to see is a greater degree of cooperation between different parties in parliament to ensure that their differences, which are in some cases may be important in principle, but are in most cases petty, that these differences do not thwart important legislation and regulation in the country.